Welcome everyone. I'm so happy we made it thus far. This is our last webinar in this four-part series. And I was reflecting this morning in preparation for this webinar that this has been a work in the making for 2 years. We started around January, February 2023, and then in September we put together the human resource leaders, the panel, and then we were able to learn and capture a lot of basically tabulate and summarize the discussions that we had with the HR leaders and our own researchers, professional in the field. And as a result of all of that, we created the white paper that Scott had put on the chat that is available in the Whole Care Network. But then we said, let's go deeper. And then we put together this four-part series webinar. And along the way, we had these wonderful members that joined us, like Sue and Danielle. And even Donna, you has been joining us all the four series. And the topic that we were just discussing before is the realities are people are talking more about caregiver, family caregivers, working family caregivers, which in particular is the topic of our series. And we are not, we're right on the mark. If we reflect on the recent report from the Harvard Business School, the same topics that we're talking right now. The 73% of the person that were interviewed mentioned that they have some form of current caregiving responsibility. But then there is this disconnect, like we were talking, between employees and employers. Only 24% of the employers recognize that caregiving affect somehow their employee functionality or productivity. But on the other hand, 80% of the employees are reporting, no, that is serious. And we have to also recognize that caregiving, it goes beyond what is traditionally considered caregiving as child care. This involves caring for a spouse, an elder parent, even a neighbor, someone that has a chronic condition, or even an adult child with special needs. So expanding the concept of what caregiving is something that we recognize. And that's why we're all here together, because we're so passionate about this topic, which needs to be recognized and addressed. Caregivers, as we have been discussing in the series, is not a thing that it happens to some employers. It's really is the reality of our time because of several circumstances that we have also discussed in the webinars. But caregivers are all over and are part of your workforce, and we have to accommodate for them and support them. So in the first series webinar, I was looking at what we have been talking before. The first one, and I encourage you all to go back and listen again the recordings. We went deep into understanding the realities of family caregivers in the workforce. Who are the family caregivers? There is a very diverse community. Then we went to see and addressing the diversity of caregiving responsibilities. And we also look into all the varieties. I mean, we have spouses, as I said before, but then we have what happened in same-sex marriages, how they are recognized, and what can we do to support all the diversity. We have children and young adults that are caregivers as well. Youth caregivers is a huge number. And then lastly, on our last seminar, we were talking about what are the resources, what is the importance of employee resource group and flexible work arrangement. So today, to wrap up all this work of conversations, research that we have done, we want to go deep and talk to you about the recommendations that we have heard and we have learned. So I will start, and please, please, I encourage you to make questions and comments on the chat. Scott is monitoring it, and we will be stopping and asking him for his opinion. But let's start. So, you went into um, looking into the inclusive workforce environment and workplace flexibility.
Sure.
What did we learn about the recommendation and your own experience? So,
Thank you, Paul, and it's great to be here with everyone sharing about all of these components of it. And in just a few minutes, Paula, I'm going to share the screen of what we have in the white paper. So if you'll make sure that I've got permission to share, that would be great. And when I was going through all of these and the experiences that I've had and that we talk about, one of the things that's most important to put us in the position where we can actually evaluate these recommendations is that we create an environment where family caregivers can self-identify. So we are recognizing the fact that we are putting in support mechanisms for caregivers that in the workplace we're identifying, they feel safe self-identifying, so that as we learn from them and as we do what you were just talking about, as we're asking the questions and we're learning what they need so that we can make the recommendations for things that fit their specific needs, they're going to be taking part of what those are. They're going to go ahead and they're going to be saying, yes, I can use this. And they'll also be collaborating with other members of the team. And then they'll be working with the organization to refine and update things so that they'll keep honing it in. I talk about the four-opter. Is this better or is this? And so as we talk about the different things that make the environment inclusive, there are a wide variety of ways we can do that. And what I've done is I also created a little document that I'll put in the chat that walks through some more detailed examples that people could use for ways to model what we're going to be talking about. I'm going to go ahead and share the white paper where we talk about the summary of what these recommendations are. And so when we go through, for example, in the supportive inclusive work environment, we talk about these 6 overarching areas, overarching ways where we can embrace a supportive and inclusive work environment. There are different ways that that'll be modeled in each organization. And one of the things that can be done is usually leverage something that's already been considered for another group. So we don't have to start from scratch with all the ones that we're coming up with. The reason, though, that we want to increase the measurement and identify what it is and make sure that the caregivers feel confident self-identifying so we can measure it and we can have enhanced strategies is so that we really understand in each organization what the dynamic of the family caregiver needs is. And that's going to vary based on the size of the organization. It's going to vary based on the type of the workforce and a whole variety of details that will impact what the number of family caregivers are and the needs that they have. And so when we have that, what we want to make sure that we're doing when we talk about the accurate measurement is leveraging things that have already been done and doing some things that we can. So it's talking about targeted communication strategies, and those can be campaigns, those can be surveys that we're doing. We're doing things so that we encourage the family caregivers, even if in the beginning it's anonymously to self-report, then to take that to the next level of personalizing that self-reporting. And when they feel that they can communicate, what happens is when we are able to measure it through whether it's EAP, whether it is focus groups, whether it's anonymous surveys, however we're doing the measurements, the results of those can then be applied based on what the needs are. And what we always want to do is we're balancing the needs of the caregiver as well as the needs of the business to thrive. And so it's not an either or, it's a both and. And how do we leverage it? How do we identify what it is and figure out ways to leverage that? And so when we are working together with that, it becomes a partnership, it becomes an alignment, and it's also able to be more fluid. And then when we talk about education for that and the options for education and awareness, there are also some caregivers who haven't self-identified as a caregiver. There are some who, until they have things that help them realize, oh, I am actually a caregiver. Culturally, or based on what they've been walking through, they've never even realized they're a caregiver. And then there are other caregivers who haven't known that there is education available. They didn't know how to find it. They didn't know what to ask. They didn't know what they didn't know. And so when we're able to proactively provide resources and locations for them to be able to be getting valuable information so they can be able to learn, and then not just to learn, but then to work collaboratively with others in how they apply it and what their challenges are, and know that they're supported in that. So having that awareness, having the education, being able to have conversations with other groups, and this is where like support groups come. So when the caregivers can all self-identify and the organization is offering support groups, then they're able to participate in those. And then the employee resource groups, and looking at the construct of the employee resource group, however, doing it through the lens of having done measurements to identify the kinds of information that's going to be most valuable. And then one of the most commonly asked for and most valuable things are flexible work arrangements, whether that's remote work options or flexible hours, is to have the flexibility. And when you're able to communicate with your team members, especially when you've got a variety of different sandwich generations, different groups of people with specific challenges for their workplace productivity and well-being, that they're able to work together collaboratively as a team and say, these are the challenges I'm going through. Well, these are the challenges I'm going through. And they can work together with that. Then the flexible work arrangements support where they are in the type of journey they're in the season of their journey they're in, and then in the responsibilities they have. So they're all working together. And then identify, because there are going to be gaps. There are a lot of programs that are going to be working together that can support everyone, but then there are gaps, there are specific needs. And when you find out what fits people, you also, when you're measuring it and you're asking about it, you're finding what's outside of that. And it's putting together the programs that are going to support that. And again, I'm going to attach a document I created that gives some examples of what those are. And then the financial assistance initiatives. And what's so important about this through the lens of the sandwich generations is that people in their 20s and 30s, when they're early in just beginning to gather some career momentum and they have very few funds and they've got a lot of demands on whatever budget they've got, they need like financial stability training and financial education, as well as some financial planning, and people that are perhaps in the generation that's in the club sandwich generation, where they've got more institutional wisdom and they've got more seniority. They have a different set of needs that they're looking at. And so each one of them can have programs that's specific to where they are with the challenges they're facing directly. So there are a variety of different ways to be considering what it is, all of them through the foundation of self-identification. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. So thank you for that summary and that description. It wasn't actually a summary, it was a great layout of all the issues that needs to be addressed. Very important things that you mentioned is to be able to itemize the things that you already have, try to reuse the resources that you already have. So for example, if you have some family leave for children, why not to use that for your elder parents? Or if you have some meals accommodation for children, why not to use those accommodate or for moms that are pregnant moms. Why not to use some of those if you have to coordinate meals for your parents? So be creative with what you have before you try to reinvent what you don't have, and identify those gaps and see how you can fill them up. Something very important that you said also, and I go back to some statistic that I just was reading. Uh, Part of the challenges from not talking about caregiving is that people become silent and they start somehow, I would say, suffering in silence. And what it causes at the end is that many just give up. They cannot manage work with caregiving responsibilities and they leave the workforce. And the numbers are staggering. I mean, 32% in average but it could get to a 50% between the most productive years, between 20 and 35. So,
Sure. And one of the most
yes,
challenging
26 and
parts of
25.
Yeah, and I didn't mean to interrupt, but Paula, one of the most challenging parts of that is when we haven't self-identified in the workplace that we are a family caregiver, and the pressures make us feel that we have to leave. That exit interview fails to capture some very valuable information. So the employee can't share that they have caregiving responsibilities. The organization doesn't understand why they've left. So they're going to be trying to replace a valuable employee, and they know all the expenses of that and the time and all the efforts. But they're missing an opportunity to improve and to have potentially saved that employee. And so the issues build on each other. And if they had been able to self-identify, they would perhaps not be having an exit interview.
Very good. Excellent, excellent, boy. So, Scott, as we move forward, any comment that in the chat that we can share with the panels?
Yeah, the chat's kind of quiet, but I've been getting a couple of private questions coming through. So one of the questions is she's new to her company as HR director, and she's wondering how can she best determine where to start as far as, an EAP or, the financial side. Do you have any insights on how she can gauge, the best place to start?
The number one place I would start is ensuring that from the very highest level of leadership in the organization through all the entire leadership team, the recognition of self-identifying and embracing and being open to caregivers self-identifying is going to be valuable. And if that's already in place, then the next place that you start is to measure the impact of family caregiving. How many caregivers are there? What are the issues that they're facing? So that by the time that you figure out what solution to begin with, you'll already have identified the magnitude, have been able to prioritize the issues, and you'll find out the best next step to take. The most important place starts with being able to have the caregivers feel confident self-identifying that this is a role they have.
Okay.
Thank you, Susan. Because that it's a perfect introduction to our next panelist, Robin, talking about the importance of education and to build a culture that is supportive of family caregivers. So, Robin, you have a lot of experience in this area.
Hi, thank you. Glad to be here. Yeah, so one of we have four recommendations in terms of education and support of leaders. I'm going to go through those briefly, but I wanted to hit on a few points in regards to that. So as a leadership trainer and coach over the last many years, and 6+ of those years I was caring for my own mother, I met a large number of managers in my training classes who would come up to me and tell me they were starting to care for a parent, or they had moved to this town to care for their parent. All the various sorts of scenarios that occur when you find yourself doing that. And as I was at that point in time as well, they were all lost. I don't know where to go for help. I don't know where to go for answers. I don't know what to do. I'm stressed. I'm afraid I'm going to lose my job. All the things we read about now and see. And this was pre-pandemic. So this was prior to the attention that caregiving is getting now in the press. And it occurred to me at the time, what's wrong? I'm not getting the help I need either. And so at any rate, the point of my telling you that is that my mother died. And when she died, part of that transition process for me was to figure out how to address this need. There was clearly a need. The employer didn't know there was a need, but the employees had a need. And at that point in time, I was just wanting to address their needs. So I created an online series of courses and subscription service for caregivers, which is the other side of my business. However, what we discovered in talking with the panelists is that one of the biggest needs is that the managers of these employees, and I discovered this as well at that time, are not prepared to have conversations with those employees about their caregiving role. And they don't know how to talk to them. They don't know how to bring up the topic. And as those of us that are former caregivers or current caregivers know, it can be a sensitive topic. It is not like raising a baby. You know, a lot of people say, oh, you know, your roles are reversed, but no, they're really not. It's a totally different role. And a lot of the things you have to deal with in caring for an aging parent or an adult relative are sensitive and intimate, and you don't want to discuss them in public with people. So I find that a lot of caregivers only want to talk to other caregivers about those things, understandably. And so managers are kind of hands off, like, I knew she was caring for her dad, but I didn't know what to say to her. And so I think one of the biggest areas where managers need training is communication skills. And one of the things I did when I created the caregiving side of my business was to take my manager training courses, of which there are 7 that I've created, and tweak those for caregivers and for managers. So communication skills, having sensitive conversations with people, perhaps dealing with some conflict. And I find that a lot of the things that managers are unaware of are the tools that are currently in place, as Susan has already pointed out. Benefits and resources are already in place within a company. And if you think about what companies have done over the last 30 years, probably for mothers and children, providing them in some companies with lactation rooms for privacy, providing them with the option to, you know, you get a call, your child broke its arm on the playground, you had no questions, go to the ER. So there's no difference between that and your parent having a fall that you have to go to the ER. You need a private place to make a call, to make phone doctor appointments or follow up on something for your parent or your adult that you're caring for. There's no difference, but that private room can be used for different options. The option to, you know, we give mothers 12 weeks when they have a baby. Some companies have paternal leave as well. We don't give employees bereavement leave more than 3 to 4 days. And that loss is traumatic. Death is a traumatic incident to our bodies and psyches. 3 to 4 days is barely enough time to get a funeral organized. And so managers aren't aware of being resourceful with the tools at their disposal already. Now, what that takes is a collaboration with HR, perhaps with some senior executives. But the bottom line does go back to the manager. It does go back to the manager being knowledgeable about the resources and tools at their disposal and being creative about how they're going to utilize those to serve this caregiver and their employee. Frequently, it is the case, at least were my experiences, that those caregivers did tell their managers, direct managers only, no higher, no broader, they were caring for someone. And those managers were empathetic and kind enough to give them the breaks and you know, you don't come to work remotely now. Those opportunities that they needed. However, the other thing that happens that I don't think managers realize is those caregivers are turning down opportunities because of the number of additional responsibilities on their shoulders. And their managers aren't making that connection that, hey, I'm offering this promotion or this additional project or responsibility to my employee and she just turned it down. They must not be interested. So they're not making that connection. So that's part of the education process as well, is that if you've got an employee who's a caregiver, they may have to turn down a promotion or a learning opportunity because they just don't have the bandwidth for it at that point in time. But the managers need to make that connection. They need to see that, okay, valuable employee, can't do this right now. Let's save this for a later point in time. How do I continue to support this employee so that they can be productive? And one of the things we've discovered and is in the research is that there is a lack of productivity with caregiver employees because of the stresses. I think if you want to do a comparison of caregiving mothers and fathers to caregivers of adults, the stress levels of caregivers of adults is way up here. You can put your child in daycare, you can put your child in school, you can put your child in after school activities. You've got a parent who perhaps has dementia, and you don't necessarily have all those tools at your disposal. So I think educating managers about the stress levels is really important as well. So how do they accommodate that well-being? It's one of the things that came up, mental health, a lot. Well-being is mental health, quite frankly, And so again, it's looking at the tools at their disposal, and it's also giving the managers the tools. How do you communicate? How do you start a conversation with somebody who's caring for an aging adult who has dementia? I don't know. I mean, I do know, but that's probably the answer you get from a manager is, I don't know, I just avoid it. So having those communication skills trainings, if managers are already getting leadership trainings, they're getting communication skills. They're getting all the soft skills like communication and conflict and sensitive conversations and teamwork. So utilize those trainings that those managers are already getting. Bring in an expert from the caregiving field that knows how to take those skills and translate those into having the conversation with the caregiver. Knowing what to ask, knowing what to say, knowing how to, at least if not able to demonstrate empathy, at least demonstrate some sympathy for what this particular individual is going through and offer them options and knowing the tools. The other part to our recommendations were to have enhanced communication strategies. And this goes back to something that Sue said as well, is that when we can get the leaders within the company to share their own stories, storytelling is a powerful leadership trait. And we all know, we hear stories from leaders that we go, wow, I can't believe that person went through that. Storytelling is hugely powerful. We can get leaders within these companies to tell their own stories. I've heard many of them, and just share them at town halls or in intranet communications or intercompany newsletters, to share those stories and bring this to the forefront to make the conversation more normal. Not that they have to get in all the intimate details that I spoke to earlier, but to share the story. I was a caregiver for my grandparent, or my wife is currently caring for her mother, whatever those stories are, but to make it, to normalize that conversation. One of the other recommendations that came forth was obviously collaboration with ERGs. Many companies don't even have one. This is a very, very simple step for a company to take to support caregivers. Find out who in your team is a caregiver and ask them, hey, I'll support you if you want to put together an ERG. I will be your champion. I will be your sponsor. But let me help you do that. For a manager, that's a big win, because now they not only have support in-house for those caregivers on their team and anyone else that will come to that group, but they've also can go themselves and learn. It's a learning opportunity for them as well. And finally, feedback. Obviously, anything a company does, they want feedback. They want some sort of, as Susan was talking about, measurement. Is it successful? Are people attending? Is it helping with productivity and absenteeism, and the other term people use, which is a little bit of a mouthful, is presenteeism. But, is it helping? And you do that with surveys. Like any company, you do internal surveys, you do employee satisfaction surveys, and this is just another quick survey you put together with five or six questions. And you find out, is this ERG providing what the caregivers need to help them be more productive at work? The outcome is that we want them more productive at work. We want them to suffer from less stress because they're at work. Because for many of these caregivers, being at work is respite. It is oftentimes where they want to be the most on any day of the week, Monday through Friday, because it's where they get a break from all those responsibilities. So it's simple enough to get the feedback. If the manager is the sponsor of the ERG, she can be responsible for soliciting that feedback and sharing it with the higher up executives. And I think the other thing that we've discussed also was achieving this work flexibility, this work-life integration. we talked recently that they don't use balance anymore. So whatever the current term is, we'll use that. However, the point is that with caregiving, I don't think it's possible, quite frankly, to have a balance. I think what you can achieve is a sometimes level at equilibrium where you've got tools in place for yourself. You've got plans, backup plans if an emergency occurs. You've got people in your court that can jump in and help you. And that includes for a manager to understand if this caregiver on their team has all these added responsibilities, many of which are crises that occur at the drop of a hat, that team needs to be bought in to supporting that caregiver as well. And that's the manager's responsibility. See that the team is bought into to supporting that individual. Because here's the thing, we all know this. Caregiving is temporary.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Robin. So valuable insights. Great points. The betterment, using resources, communication, education, normalizing the topic about caregiving in order that people can come forward and talk about it and have these team and resources and backup plans in place that are part of the responsibilities from the managers. Wonderful, wonderful points, Robin. Thank you so much for that great overview. Scott, any comment that you would like to share from the chat or any other question that may have come individually?
Yeah, absolutely. So both Sue and Robin have kind of shared that a lot of the changes tend to start at the top down. One of the questions is more, as companies are focused on right now anyway, new administrations coming in, how's that going to impact their business plans, inflation, all of this. And the employees talk amongst each other, and there's, a greater recognition of, well, Sue can't come in tomorrow. She's taken off because she's got to take her mom to the doctors. So there's a greater awareness often at the employee level of who the caregivers are. So do you have any recommendations or quick thoughts on how it could go from the bottom up?
Could you rephrase that question? Because it got a little complicated.
Yeah. So the essence of the question is, with how demanding corporations, all the things they have, the leadership have on their plate as far as growing the business and all that they do, it's the employees that often know who the caretakers are in the organizations because they're talking. They know, I might not be coming in tomorrow afternoon because I have to take my mom to the doctor's office. So how can the employees start the conversation to enhance awareness with leaders when leaders are focused on driving the business at the moment? Do you have any initial thoughts on how
I
start from the
do.
bottom up?
Well, one thing most companies expect of their managers is to have what are called one-on-ones with their employees. Whatever the frequency of those is dictated by the company or the manager. And they typically happen about once a month or once every 2 to 3 weeks, I think, in a good case scenario. And those one-on-ones frequently take the format of a total business agenda. But I know in my coaching with managers, when they need to learn how to hold those one-on-ones, one of the things I've always encouraged them to do, and I have found with leaders of companies, is to check in on the well-being of your employee. Because if your employee is not well, and by well I mean holistically, then you don't have a good employee. You don't have someone who's there for you because something's going on. They're checked out somewhere. So those are opportunities, I think, for employees to address the caregiving situation with their managers. Past that point, I really believe it starts to fall on managers to address it up the chain of command when they realize I've got 2, 3 employees who are full of caregiving responsibilities, and here are the situations I'm facing.
quick follow-up to that. Would you have any quick ways that, as far as what they should communicate to their managers without coming across as, these are my words, not the person that asked the question, as like needy or, combative? Do you have any thoughts on how they should communicate their challenges?
I think it's simple. You state the situation. I've started to care for my elderly mother, father, my spouse. I have an adult child at home who has functional challenges. And this particular situation often presents me with the need to leave in an emergency or to make doctor's calls during the day, or you don't have to get into the intimate details. I don't think that's necessary. I think what's necessary, just like a parent might come to you and say, all right, I'm trying to get my kid out of public school and into private school, and I'm dealing with the following problems. Can I get your support?
And
Consuelo, I know you had some comments, so I'm curious.
I do, and this sort of leads right into what I'm going to be sharing next about that overall organizational well-being, and having to look at it from the well-being of the employees dictate what the overall well-being of the company is when you do look at the individual needs of the employers. So what you said, Scott, was very pertinent, because there's a lot that goes on the bottom surface where caregivers do talk. There is that outlet where you talk to your coworker about the things that are going on at home in these safe environments where you can share and glean information from each other. And that is where it starts, as the head is coming together on the top of the C-suite. The C-suite is starting to get together and thinking, oh, we've got to get a program in place to support the caregivers. Is oftentimes that information, the concerns are already being talked about amongst each other. And I think allowing that to happen in the structure of safe spaces, in the ERGs, in those different spaces, you will find that caregivers know how to organize what their needs are. They now know how to talk to each other and say, well, this happens when my mother is going through this, or my dad's had a stroke, or I'm dealing with cognitive issues with a loved one who has a dementia. They talk and they can get information from each other. And that's where it gets to start with, when they're talking amongst each other and saying, well, what? And they're saying, oh, if I didn't have to work on that project next week, or if I can get off whenever my mom is having one of these episodes in the morning and I can't get to work on time. Oftentimes employees will collaborate and be able to come up with solutions with each other that can then be packaged and be presented to those people empowered that can help put in place those needs that the employers have. When an introduction, as I am an occupational therapist, I've been in many homes over 25 years, working with clients and seeing face-to-face the caregivers who have concerns about, when can I go back to work? What do you think? You think she'll be okay if I leave because I have a project I need to work on? And all of these concerns about, I've already been off for 3 weeks because mom's been in the hospital for 3 weeks. And really, I need to go back to work and just be able to work on little projects. And, the employees care. They want to go back to work. They don't want to leave their employers hanging when there is a need that's going to keep the company afloat, that keeps the company profitable. Caregivers want their employers to succeed, but it takes them being able to have a space where they can share what their needs are. And so when we're talking about the well-being of the organization, I would hope that as the people, the policymakers, the decision makers can really allow for employees to sort of pull back the curtain in their life and really share some of those day-to-day struggles, those things that come around with caregiving. Things cycle around. They may fall, go to the doctor's office, you forget a doctor's appointment, oh, they have to get blood work, or it circles around. I mean, there is just something that circles around in caregiving that comes around so often in our life that it's not predictable, but it's coming. So you've got to have a plan in place, and employees can really tell you what they need. And oftentimes it may not be as big as what employers are thinking. Oh my gosh, I got to give some more. They want more out of me, when really they may not. It's like these little open windows of opportunity where you can allow them to be able to be flexible and all of the things. Susan, you did a great job of just lining in place all the different things that have to start with identifying that they are caregivers. And once that door is open, I think the conversations happen. So, Scott, great question. And I think employees need to really look at allowing caregivers that space to help decide what is needed and what it takes to keep them functioning and getting back in the rhythm of work, while also having this other side of their life that keeps pulling at them and taken away from them being productive and being available for the well-being, the well-being of the company and their own well-being.
Thank you. Thank you, Consuelo, and great discussion in the chat as well. And Danielle, you had a suggestion because it is very much true. Caregivers know about each other. I was thinking about the floor level, when you are on the hospital, between the nurses, between the staff members, they know, but how that can be escalated to managers. And it goes by what Robin was saying in terms of educating and making them not only be sensitive to child related, but any type of caregivers. And very important topic, and we heard that from our HR leaders, normalizing the conversation about caregivers. Danielle, please share with us, you had some comments about how to address this escalation, or how to help bubble up from the bottom up the caregiver issues.
Yeah, I think that there's this sense, I really loved Robin's suggestion around how do you make it safe for people to bring up these things in one-to-ones? How do you ensure that the manager is bringing up things in one-to-ones? And sometimes that can feel really hard because you feel like I'm the lonely only, especially if people are not talking about it. So, particularly with their manager, I think if you know of other people who are struggling with this, or want to be able to bring this up, there is a really nice idea of like, there is strength in numbers. And it might not be that the person has the exact same challenge as you, but it is impacting them in the same way. Whether I have small kids, whether I have, aging parents, whether I have an adult child, I'm going to need some different flexibility. And I think we should be able to create a coalition of folks who are able to say to management broadly, we have some other needs. Here is how it impacts the work for us. So it might not be that we're available all of the time, but here is the alternative way in which we can still get the work done, help get results. I think if you can share with management broadly, here's what I need, here's how it's impacting the work, and here's how I'm going to try and create an alternative that still gets you to what you need. Managers are generally pretty open to making some shifts. At least that's what I've found in my own experience, is that like building a coalition of people who can kind of support you and say like, yeah, this is not just this Danielle, this is all of us are struggling with this particular problem. Here's like what we propose as an alternative for how we might be able to continue to get the work done, can be a nice way to have support go bottom up rather than top down. Because sometimes, to be honest, leaders can be stubborn. They have succeeded in one way and one style of working. And so they think like that's the way to do it. But if you can show them, I can still get the work done, or it might need to look a little bit different, but it can still be done in a specific way. Folks do seem open. So that's just another way. I do like the idea of a one-to-one, but it needs to be a really psychologically safe space for you to be willing to share, like, hey, this is what's happening with me. This is what I'm going to need. This is what it's going to look like. Here's my plan for how the work is going to continue. Feels like one way, and then another way is also like, hey, who are the other people, right? And if we're all on the same team and the manager is hearing the same message, not just from me, but from potentially other people as well, or how can we speak in one voice is really helpful.
And that goes to Donna's suggestion of having lunch support groups or afternoon support groups or coffee support groups. Great suggestions. Thank you so much, everyone. Now, Robin mentioned the topic about we are changing the definitions. One topic that was very common, and we heard that a lot, this work personal life balance really is not something that the work life balance, right? It sounds more like a fallacy than something that really can be achieved, especially when you are a family caregiver, a working family caregiver. So what people are start talking more about is how do you can do work and life integration and achieve mental, physical, emotional, social, and financial health. And Scott, let's start looking at financial health because we know caregiving can be a very expensive endeavor, especially in some chronic conditions like dementia and others. So, please shine a little bit of the light of what are the things that we should be looking in order to achieve that financial health.
Sure. Excited to talk about this. So there's three initial steps that make sense. And the initial steps start with you understanding the situation of the person you're providing care for. And the first area is you just really need to understand their wishes and their desires on some things. You know, do they want to age in place? Do they want to be buried, cremated? So just start to understand what they would like to happen if the opportunity exists. Secondly, you need to fully, whether you do it yourself or hire an advisor, but you really need to understand their personal finances and their legal documents. You've got to understand their income sources, what their current expenses are, medical insurances they have, whether it's private, Medicare, Medicaid, long-term care, are they a veteran, legal documents, financial power of attorneys, review those documents because it's very common that someone created a will 20 years ago and had a brother listed as the executor or perhaps even the financial power of attorney, and their brother passed 10 years ago and they just haven't updated it. So you really need to kind of see the pieces that they put into place. The third area is build your support team as early as possible. Find people to do the tasks that you know you don't want to do or cannot do. So those are the three places to start. Now, why? Why start with those? Well, it's their desires, their medical needs, and their financial situations that's really going to drive a lot of your decision making. And it's your support team that's going to help you get things done efficiently. And not having any awareness of these issues, either on their financial resources or what their desires are, or having the right support team. These are the first areas that are going to cause you to be negatively financially impacted because you're going to lose time at work, you're going to be overly stressed, and all of that's going to impact your performance, and raises all of it. So, and you may end up having to spend money out of your own pocket initially that you didn't need to just because you didn't understand some of their situation. So Knowing those three areas, and knowing where the gaps are key. So understand their situation, recognize where the gaps are, and then start looking on ways you could fill those gaps. And the first places you're going to want to look are government programs, local charities, again, who you put on your support team, work benefits. The idea of filling the gaps with external resources, again, it's saving you time, could save you financial resources. And why not take advantage of systems that people have already put in place instead of creating your own? So find those areas that are already there for you to tap into and fill as many gaps as you can. So what we're doing here is we're initially trying to deflect or outsource as many of the solutions to fill these gaps as you can before you have to start tapping into your own pocket. So only after you've ruled out all possible outsourcing, then you may have to start to assume and absorb some of the financial responsibility yourself. We know, and we've stated in the white paper, that on average, a family caregiver spends $7,000 to $10,000 annually out of their own pocket. So even filling in gaps with these resources in place, it's very common that they still don't fill all the gaps. So I just want to talk a few minutes about some areas of personal financial exposure that come into play when you do have to start assuming some of those additional costs. First place you really want to start understanding are what some of those out-of-pocket expenses are going to be. So, as you understand now the medical coverage that maybe your dad has and his deductibles, co-pays, etc. Well, maybe his cash flow doesn't cover some of his co-pays now. So now you have a more specific dollar amount that you might have to, help pay monthly or quarterly to cover some of those expenses. But to start understanding what some of those outlays are, and start doing the best that you can to build them into your budgets. Now, this is why getting on the front side of this is really important, so you could build things in, so you can have time to research. Now, I know we don't all have that luxury, but when you do have any of that, take advantage of it. You want to start understanding, if you do have to reduce your work hours, how that's going to impact, financially, how you're able to support your mom or your dad, but also how you're going to be able to help your daughter play softball next spring. So there's a lot of those challenges, but again, it's by just filling in as many gaps as you can with outside resources and just doing the best you can. There's never going to be a perfect scenario on any of this. A couple other key areas to think about: debt accumulation. It's easy to throw things on a credit card. It's easy to, just run up debt, but that's putting yourself in a pretty deep hole. As you're covering maybe some additional medical costs or maybe some home modifications, and you just throw it on a credit card, there might be better ways to structure that. Maybe look into a home equity or a home equity line of credit, lower rates, maybe more flexibility on when or how it's paid back. Another quick thing on debt, it's easy maybe to just say, well, I'll go ahead and co-sign this loan for my dad, or co-sign things. Not giving legal advice, but I'd talk to a lawyer before you chose to do anything along those lines, because again, there might be better ways you could structure or sign it, maybe as a fiduciary, as the power of attorney, that might give you some additional protection of not having to pay back, a personal loan or debt that you sign off on. So just always try and do your best to be clear-headed when you're doing certain financial steps. Tax burdens, there are some tax credits, but typically they fall under the person that you're caring for has to be a dependent. Living in your home for half the year or more, and you're covering, I think it's more than 50% of their living expenses. So there are opportunities if you're providing that level of care to receive some tax credits as well. Retirement savings gaps. Last thing you want to do is tap into your retirement. I know for most of us, that is our outside of our homes, that's our biggest asset. And so in those binds, it's an easy reflex to say, I'll just take a couple grand out of this. I won't have to run up credit card debt or worry about a line of credit. It's just easier. Well, the easier is not always the better way, because as it was shared today, caregiving is not forever. I know it feels that way, but it will end. And at that time, you're going to want to regroup and move forward yourself and your family forward. And by taking things out of retirement accounts early, paying penalties, or reducing your contributions so you're not even getting matching that your company's offering, those are easy reflex things to do, but that's where you need to take a step back, talk to folks, maybe, again, reach out to an advisor. There are a lot of advisors that charge hourly rates. You don't have to have $500,000 to have an advisor anymore. So there are a lot of folks out there that charge differently, more affordably than just assets under management. So I would urge you to look for, resources along those lines. Really, at the end of the day, one last thing on legal. I touched on wanting to read through like wills and powers of attorneys to make sure that the people appointed are still capable and willing to handle those roles. Now, if there are no documents in place, then depending on your mom or dad's mental status, it might be as simple as taking them, talk to a lawyer and get things in place. If they're in a situation where their mental acuity is not there for them to make those decisions and there is no power of attorney, then it's more challenging. You may have to go through the court process and get custodianship or guardianship, longer process, more costly, but those options are out there. Power of attorneys, hugely important. Quick public service announcement. Many financial institutions have internally created their own versions of power of attorneys. So while you may have one in place that your mom created 3 years ago, it's up to date, you send that into a company, the company may come back and say, well, it's good for this one situation, but ongoing, we have our own internal form that we're going to need you to complete and sign off on. So again, if you have the ability to get ahead of that situation, sit down, find out the financial institutions that your folks have accounts with, their credit cards, all of that, and just start getting on the phone, calling them, emailing, and saying, hey, do you have any internal power of attorney forms or anything my parents would need to sign to give me the ability to step in when needed to help them? So doesn't sound like a big thing, but if you're thrust into this situation and you're calling thinking I have my dad's power of attorney, I'm set, may not be the case, because companies have really worked hard to cover their what. And so they've created their own internal forms in a lot of situations. Always expect the unanticipated costs. You never know, even with the best of planning, things are going to come up that you just didn't anticipate. So some quick strategies: plan ahead, maximize benefits, explore Medicaid, veterans benefits, seek employer support. We touched on that very well today. Leverage professional help, work with your financial planners, accountants, lawyers, ideally as a team so they could create an overall strategy with you, and protect your retirement savings because it's your second largest asset and you are going to want to retire one day.
Thank you, Scott. That was amazing on the summary of all the things to look at. And most definitely, a big portion of the stress of family caregiver or working family caregivers is the financial insecurity or the unknowns. And as many pointed out in the chat, most of the time we are thrown into this caregiving role after an emergency. But even if it happens after an emergency, now is the time to start looking into all those documents to be able to keep moving forward. And we are running a little bit out of time. So and I know some of you have to drop off because have other responsibility. But I want to summarize today and really encourage everyone that is listening afterwards or the audience here during this webinar to look at the resources in the whole care network that Scott shared with us, the whole care network, our site where we have all the recordings, the white paper, and please reach out to us. We're here to support you for any question afterwards. And the takeaway message for today and every session that we had is what are you going to do tomorrow to make your working environment more family caregiver friendly? So with that, I thank you everyone for participating, and we had great insights today of the recommendations for a better working environment for working family caregivers. Thank you so much, and if there is any your comments, please share it. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, Paula, for all you've done. Appreciate it.
Th-
Great
Thank
job.
you, everyone.
Great
Have a
job,
wonderful
everybody.
afternoon.
Paula.
Happy Thanksgiving, and happy holidays to everyone. Thank
You as
you.
well. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Great. It
Bye.
was a great program. Thank you so much. All of you are valuable. Thank you.
Thank you.
Paula, fabulous. Thanks for all you did. Scott knocked it out of the park. Great job.
Yeah.
Thanks.